Welcome to the Own Your Education podcast, where we're putting the pedal to the metal on families and founders who are in the driver's seat on doing education differently. Because learning isn't one size fits all. What if your kid's education was molded around your life instead of the other way around? Here we talk to people who've tossed that rulebook right out the window. I'm your host, Ryan Clem. Let's go for a ride. Welcome back to the Own Your Education podcast. This is part 2 of our conversation with William Durant, who is a father of 7 and the founder of a classical school. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, be sure to go back and catch that one before diving into this one. You had mentioned something about how what you created in JP2, you wanted to model the intimacy and the intentionality of homeschooling. And, you know, some of these more common art sounds like just that, right?
Yes. Something that you could go with your kiddo around your dining room table or in your kitchen, island and do with your own kids. You could absolutely do this, right? And it sparks that. So like one of those testimony stories is they were doing some sourdough and I had a 4th grader go home and tell his mom, like, he's super into sourdough starters. And the science behind a sourdough, like, is so
it's a
unique.
science experiment. You have to like feed it, right?
Yes, and get rid of the discard, and that's what we eat, right? And it's so unique. And so having a 4th grader go home and tell their parent, that's what I want. Or that same 4th grader just excelling in mathematics and presenting him, some Euclid geometry with a protractor and making stained glass artwork with the protractor. Like, it's just amazing to see that engagement because they're given that freedom to do that. So it is that intentionality of what a homeschool would be, that we want even from our own classrooms.
And a really traditional homeschool too, like traditional values and project-based learning, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. And I'm curious, the families, you mentioned you have 39 families currently.
Yes,
When you started, you had
16.
So probably as you guys have grown, would you say there are families who are coming to you saying, okay, we're not living this way, or maybe we're not as holistic in our home life, but we want to be, and the kids are kind of almost evangelizing to the parents, like, let me show you how to make a candle.
Yes. Maybe not to the extent of because a lot of those things take a lot of pieces and parts, and families just don't always have that. Sure. But they do in a way that
their resourcefulness
I can remember, when we first did leather work, they were making pocket knife pouches and rosary pouches. And one of the moms come and saying, thanks, I have to go to the leather shop now because they're wanting to do leather work at home. Yeah. And that being a part of, that evangelizing to these kind of traditional hands-on activities. Yeah. Right. And I can think of several of the kids that take home quite a bit of those vegetable plants that they grow themselves and have their own garden.
Wow.
And the moms are like, well, what do we do with this? And the kids are telling them, this is what we do.
I know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And just this year, one of the 3rd graders, they do a cooking unit, cooking omelets or cooking pasta. And that student went home, he made dinner for their family that night from what he learned in Common Arts class that very day. And he was so excited about it. And it was delicious, right? Yeah. And so they do go home and share that. And I will also share, some of the families come and they just say how it's changed their family dynamic or atmosphere, to which the things that they used to do, they don't do anymore, or that they're doing something different. And that's changed kind of their routine as a family. And for me, that's that model of, we're succeeding as a school, right? A lot of modern schools are like, what are your test scores? Because that shows your success, right? In this case, the quantitative data can serve in a purpose and in a way, but when I hear that qualitative feedback of families learning from the school and saying, we wouldn't do it any other way now. This is how, and that's that feedback, like, we're doing what the Lord wants us to do. This is being successful and it's impacting the families.
And I would imagine it's really empowering for the child and the family to have this skill where they can create something from nothing. And that's what I love to hear in your words. It's like, what is the value at the highest level of these common classes? It's not just we're making honey, we're making maple syrup. Like, what are the skills that you are wanting to instill in these young people?
A perfect example of that, year 2, when they study Greek history, we do weaving chainmail. And they're just little links, but it's all pattern.
Like metal? Like,
okay. They're little aluminum rings, right?
Oh, so like what a knight's armor might be made out of?
Exactly, that's chainmail, right? Okay. So I integrate it into history of the different civilizations, the Persian chainmail versus the Greek or the Spartan, or, just all the different types of chainmail. Anyways, very difficult to do. They're just doing little bracelets, and it's a weaving process of rings and getting the pattern down. And I can remember one of my boys, very intellectually smart and gifted, a hard worker, just overall model student, right? And he struggled with this. He couldn't do it. He kept giving up, just throwing it down, right? Hasn't been presented with like a challenge in his life because he's very hard. Intellect comes very easily to him. So for him, he couldn't weave this chainmail. Everybody else in class was getting it except for him.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
And so what did come out of it? This is a common arts class, so it's again not practical. We're not putting on chainmail and going out to war, right? And so to answer your question, what are we hoping that they come out of this? Well, for him, the perseverance, because he eventually got it. Yeah. And then he went on to get the harder one. And then he ended up doing all of them ahead of everybody else. If we just let him give up when something was hard, he wouldn't have ever had that joy of that achievement.
Right.
And then sharing that, helping other students in the class with it.
Yeah.
So some common arts, some kids don't like the things that we do because it's hard or it's just not their thing. The boys, when we make them sew, it's not their thing, right? But it's good for them.
I feel a little so-so.
Yeah, a little so-so. So
it's my dad joke. Yeah, the day.
There you go. It offers more than just creating of an object, right?
Yeah.
So they learn what they do like, what passions they have. They learn what their passions aren't. Yeah. That's okay. Because as a community as a whole, it's not that everybody has their own chickens and has their own eggs. We were kind of talking about this, right? It's in a community how we lean on each other. So this person may have chicken eggs. This person may have a cow and milk.
I have the sourdough.
You have the sourdough.
I have the chainmail.
How do we help serve each other in the things that we do have and the gifts that we have? So that's the common arts, right? Is you're not going to have the kiddo that loves everything we do, but someone's going to love something and they may go on in life and continue to do that. And then how do they turn around and help the community? And so when you start instilling these things in the kids, it's just like that whole idea of modeling, that modeling of perseverance, of beauty, of what is beauty, because beauty can be distorted, right? What is truth? That these arts help define that brings it out in them. And we have to continue to give them those opportunities.
Wow, that's really well said. And I would imagine too, from everything I've heard from you based on how your family lives and what you're modeling at JP2, it's this return to traditional living. And if we think about the times of, let's just take Mom and Pa from Little House on the Prairie, like they didn't have an option to give up, right? And I would imagine that's also kind of the lesson too, is like that perseverance factor. And if you don't get it right the first time, well, keep trying until you do, right?
Right. And it's the same thing. Like you don't like what somebody said, or you don't like, if it's on our device and, I don't like that, I'm just going to sweep past it, right? We're in that continual hamster wheel of if we don't like it, we just move on. Well, what if we don't have a choice? Like you said, they didn't have a choice. They had to do these things. And so what did they learn from that perseverance?
And was this, would you say, kind of also, your philosophy about kind of these hands-on activities and approaches in the common arts? I know that's just a piece of the larger puzzle, but was that also a catalyst when you were saying, here's the parent I want to be, here's the father I want to be, and I want my kids to go to a school like that, and it doesn't exist? Like, was that kind of your, what was like your aha moment? I was like, all right, I'm doing this. I'm going to be a co-founder in starting a school.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, there was a school, it had recently closed down, that had kind of these common arts things that, our first year, our 3 common arts teachers went and visited. Just we are modeling off of something that has been done, but it's not currently being done anymore, right? It's all geared towards the STEM activities, which is a portion of the truth. Like those are good things. They are hands-on things, but they should point back to the truth of creation in itself, right? And so when we see just the opportunity to do common arts, it was part of me. Like, don't let the bow tie fool you. I love classical literature. I love to read. I love to learn myself, always continuing and modeling that for kids. Like, I still continue to learn things every day. And I don't know all the answers, but we're going to continue to learn them in terms of class. Yeah. But same thing with figuring out how to fix a dryer that I feel like I have to fix every other week, of can I do this for myself, for my family, or do I have to pay someone else to do it, right? Or
and that's something that stays with you for life.
It does. It should. Yeah. Exactly. And so it's just offering that opportunity form students with an understanding, like, you can continue to learn, even if it's not your thing, right? You can continue to learn these things and it will stick with you. And so it was part, when we started, you know, Common Arts has been a part of our founding, and again, what set us apart. And every year we get better and better at implementing it. And the more outside time we can get with kids, especially in the afternoons, like I talked about, the better it's for the kids. So taking the middle school kids into the greenhouse and having them take their shoes off and their socks off and getting in the dirt and take care of
grounding.
It is very grounding. That's what we do, right? And now, a lot of times when that happens, our radishes don't make it out of the greenhouse and the peas don't make it out of the greenhouse. They
There's
eat them all.
some sampling happening.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of sampling, but it's good sampling, right? It's that hopefully as they grow up, they want to do this in their own home, right?
Yeah.
So it has been a part of us from the beginning. And for me, very hands-on. And that's kind of reflecting back, you know, how best do I learn? Because that's how best I'm going to teach. And I learn by doing. And so a lot of kids do learn by doing. Some kids can read it and they've got it. Some kids can hear it and they've got it. And so it is, in a classroom of 20 kids, each kiddo learns a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And many of them do need that hands-on application to see it come together. And that's that missing piece of modern education. Now let's do it. We just read this book about even tanning hides. Well, let's tan a hide and see what it's like, because it's hard work.
Yeah. And I know that you have a background as an educator, starting when you were just 16 years old working in a daycare. And I know you got your bachelor's and your master's in education, and you've taught in traditional schools, you've taught in, you know, faith-based schools, public schools. Can you talk a little bit about maybe differences you saw from some of your past experiences and to now? I think that hands-on kind of project-based approach you feel is essential, right, for learning. How would you say, like, you came to have that opinion?
Yeah. Just through my own learning and formation of, okay, so I started 16-year-old working in a daycare, you know, in a small town. And I loved working with kids from that point on. I was a farm boy, so I'd go work on the farm during the summer, harvest wheat. You know, I value hard work and a good day's work, especially having my own boys grow now, and they want to come with me to do all these side jobs that I may do. And that's a big part of it, right? And then went into education as my undergraduate and received my master's in education as well. So education I've been very passionate about. But what I felt lacking in is that educational model that I received through all of my graduate and undergraduate studies was all very modern progressive education. I had no idea there were other options. I didn't even know what classical education was. Leaving, even teaching my first 5 years, I didn't know what classical education was. Because it was all very geared towards just that progressive model. If you have your class subject, and it's very segmented, just separate from one another. And so what makes classical education a little bit different, you know, modern education will say, we want to hit all these things, all these, say, standards, right? Objectives in the whole course of the year. Because there's so many of them, you can only go so deep, surface level. Whereas classical education, you know, we're only going to hit 3 or 4 good books, but we're going to go deep. We're going to make meaning of it, right? And so under my own education, finally being exposed to, and honestly is being exposed to during the creation of JP2. You know, I have a background in history, and so it speaks to humanity. So I have elements of it. I have truths in it, and there are truths to it in modern education as well, little kernels of here and there, like, oh, they may read still a classical book. That's great, you know? But what I was lacking was just the depth. And so as I have, as an administrator, learned myself, because I'm teaching my teachers, what does it mean to teach classically? Well, instead of putting students will be able to up on the board, which was the past 5 or, you know, maybe 10 years ago, you know, or our objective of the lesson is XYZ up on the board. You're telling the kids the punchline of the joke before you tell the joke. It's all up on the board, right?
Yeah, I always hate that.
And rather than allowing the kids to find it out for themselves, that self-exploration, right? Of presenting a material that allows the kids to go into it. Rather than me standing and lecturing and telling them X, Y, and Z, they're going to discover X, Y, and Z. And it's through that process of discovery that they retain it, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, in my own education, that's changed. Like 5 years ago, that's not where I was at. And now that where I'm at is like, I can't go back. I wouldn't be able to go back into the traditional educational classroom, partly because, you know, I've embraced it and like, oh, there are other educational philosophists out there. Charlotte Mason, Maria Montessori. I mean, these are in contrast to, say, John Dewey's philosophy of education. So in discovering, and it was again through like this homeschool lens, because what many homeschool families kind of model of that exploration, that wonder, that freedom in environment and freedom of a lesson, not be so restrained from having to stick to the daily lesson schedule, right? That's something for myself that I've grown to really embrace in these other philosophies of education that I bring back to my staff as I learn and grow. And then we learn and grow together of how do we implement this? And then to see the beauty of a child reciting, a 10 stanza poem. And why do we do that? Well, at their age, they can do it, one. And if we work that muscle, they'll continue to be able to do it. And then we give them good literature in terms of to recite. So then they know what good speaking is. If we give them crummy words to read, modern language, that's all they're going to know, and that's all they're going to speak. But we give them Shakespeare. Yes, at a sixth grade Shakespeare, because then they know what good language is. So it was far vastly different than what I experienced in the different models. Being in public school, being in private school, very progressive education, to where I am now, to see there can be a beauty to educating. There is a balance of, like I mentioned earlier, the sitting behind a desk and taking time to make good penmanship, right? Cursive, to, okay, we need some outdoor time. What does that look like? There is a balance, right? And I wouldn't say we're always perfect at anything we do, right? We're learning.
Yeah.
Right? As I said, 5 years ago, I wasn't here, right? I wasn't in this kind of thinking of education for my own children and the children of families that are very like-minded. But once you give them that little bit of love and beauty to what school can be about, then they come to love to come to school rather than kicking and screaming to go to school. Now I still have one that does that. So,
well, we're all human.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
And I know that JP2 is also unique in that there are no computers, right? And that's part of probably this classical approach and traditional approach. And when parents are they're probably coming to you knowing a bit about what you're about, but do parents ever say, well, gosh, like no computers, how will they be prepared for their adulthood?
Yeah. So I don't have parents coming because they know we don't do computers.
Yeah.
But I have heard feedback from parents that that's the first thing that they're asked from just community members, whether that's at their parish or church level, of how are they going to be prepared?
Yeah.
It's like, I was prepared, and we had very limited technology when I was in school, right? And if we are training them to read well, speak well, to learn how to do something well, they can pick up a computer and learn to use it well. But it's setting those boundaries of what age range should have a computer versus shouldn't have a computer, right?
Yeah.
And so, up to our 8th graders, this is the first thing, we've talked about integrating some very basic computer applications over a summer period to help foster computer skills, which is what it used to be,
Computer
right?
literacy. Yeah.
But I'm also not opposed to bringing in typewriters. Let's teach you how to type with a typewriter.
Oh man, I don't think I've never done that. And like actually, other than just like chicken pecking.
Right. I mean, talk about make sure you have your spelling correct before you type it, or you have to retype the whole thing. So yeah, but we don't use technology because we don't need to use it. Right? Everything we can find a book, something tangible. Again, touching. How do we learn as humans? Well, we learn through our senses. So we should be able to touch it, the smelling of the pages, the reading and the imagination of what can come out of those words. It's not the same as reading it off of a screen, right?
Yeah.
And so, especially with their development, we talked about developmental things in terms of overuse technology, all of those things that can be more detriment than positive. And so at JP2, we de-emphasize the use of technology. Now, that doesn't mean, again, like I don't have a phone. I have a phone. I have to use a phone. That's the nature of my position. Teachers record their grades.
Can't live under a rock.
I know,
right?
I can't live under a rock. Teachers record their grades. They use their computers. They may pull out the projector on the cart. If you think about it, for us, it was probably the TV on the cart that would come to classrooms in grade school, right? In this case, it's a projector on the cart. And, I just put up Washington crossing the Delaware and the virtues of Washington as we read his address to Congress about his presidency, right? So we're connecting literature with the visual of a beautiful piece of artwork. And then also the things that weren't correct in terms of that artwork, right? And so teaching them, don't always take it for truth. You have to explore and question and grow out of it. And so
how did that look with the picture of Washington? Like, what things weren't accurate? I'm curious.
Okay. So crossing the Delaware,
The famous photo of him.
The famous photo of him. Yes. Famous photo of him.
Which I saw in person last summer at the Met.
Yes. So
and it's beautiful.
The timeline,
It's huge.
So he's crossing at Christmas Eve, right? And there's ice in the water. Well, that time of year, there wouldn't have been ice in the water yet.
What time of year? It was Christmas.
That was December. So it would be a solid sheet. You know, or the solid sheet would come February time period, something like that. So there was just very small details, but it adds to the emphasis of the struggles across. The other piece of it was a snowstorm going on when they crossed, so there wouldn't actually been any visibility. But how do you paint that, right? You don't.
Right.
So you have to as an artist, and that's what we talk about. Take creative license. You know, what is too far, what is accurate, even with movies or comparison to books that we read.
Oh, yeah.
You know, there is a sort of creative license that you give the author, you know, the ability to do so. So those were the two examples that we used. But that's a beautiful painting.
That's a great
in the sense
discussion.
Of it represented, you know, the African-American slave that was on the ship. There was the Irishman that was on the boat with Washington. So it represented America as not just one singular white man, right? But a whole conglomeration of uniquely different people that come together for the common purpose of crossing this Delaware at Christmas Eve to surprise attack, right? So virtues. So
I love that, though. It's like, how much of this is art and that creative license, and when does it get into a territory of truth bending?
Correct.
Right?
Oh, correct. And so that's a skill to be taught and learned, right? In our day and age, we just take everything we hear as truth. It's like we have to question that. We have to question everything, right?
Yeah.
Not that we disbelieve it, but we should question it, because at what point does it become not accurate? And
especially with AI, right?
So all the more reason to really give attention to the learning process and to distinguish what is truth. And so that's why we start with books. Right? And what is real, tangible in front of us, like I mentioned earlier, beginning to end in creating, because even computers can take the place of some of that hard work. They make our work a lot easier this day and age, right? So there does come a point where, okay, we do need to learn this skill in order to move forward. But that's going back to that kind of biggest myth that we get asked, of how would they be prepared if they're not learning to use a computer? They will be prepared.
Yeah. Well, and everything you've talked about is like kind of this mindset of, I'm going to figure it out, right? And if you can learn to figure out how to leather work, you probably can figure out how to open Microsoft Word, I would imagine.
I would imagine as well.
You know, obviously, I think families are coming to you because they're attracted to this model, and there's only one of you, of your kind, at least in the city we both live in. For parents who are listening to this saying, gosh, like, classical education sounds really interesting, like, I'd like to explore this further, what are some ways they could do that?
Yeah.
Maybe using a computer would be involved.
It probably would be. Yes, it would. I mean, so first off, the families that are coming to us, one of the things when I take families on tours, I really talk about our process of enrolling new families. And I share this, like, the culture of the family will have an impact on the culture of the school. The culture of the school will have an impact on the culture of the family.
So two-way street.
Two-way street. Like, we give and take from each other all the time. And so we have to be intentional about, so they know when they're coming to me, we don't do technology. We downplay the role of technology in the home. I encourage families that have or up to an 8th grader, they don't need a cell phone through 8th grade. When they start driving, it is a good time probably to integrate that. Even then, a dumb phone is probably the best option. Again, more positives than negatives. And so families are coming knowing that
they want that.
That is us. And so they are wanting that. If they hear, like, every now and then I'll get a call from somebody out of town, they're moving to town. They found our website by just looking up classical education because they have had an exposure to either a homeschool or homeschool co-op or a classical school themselves. So they're looking for that same feel of material that impacts the culture, right? And so they'll call, and I have phone calls with them, and that's where I share all about us. And so for families that are foreign to it, I mean, that's the first thing to do, is to understanding is sometimes just by exploring what other avenues or classical avenues there are. And if you want to understand what they are, I always share through the organization called Classical U. they have published material, a parent's guide that I gave to all of our parents the first year of what is a classical education. So it outlines those 3, grammar, rhetoric, and logic stage, into the quadrivium, and why we teach Latin at school starting in first grade. And so finding those resources, but the best way, like even when we started, it's like, I don't know how to describe classical education, is just by coming and visiting, to seeing. You know, if you have kiddos that go to a public school or private school, I hope that you would see a distinct difference in our classroom settings by the feel and the atmosphere of the kids in the hallway, right? And simply coming and seeing is the best way to really get that exposure. Here in Wichita, classical school, Wichita, I take my teachers there. They've been established for several more years than we have, and they're a growing community. I took them, my teachers, to go see. Let's see how they're doing it. And then, you know, I took my teachers down to Holy Child in New Mexico, another classical school that we model off of, to see, right? To be in person, to ask the questions. And that's why.
Use your senses.
Exactly. So there is a point, like, I'm going to Google it first. I'm going to get a quick answer, and that may be exactly what I was looking for. That's great. It's for us or it's not for us. We're like, well, I still have questions. Then come see.
Yeah.
Come see.
Would you say some of the families that are enrolled now, have they come from more traditional environments that are vastly different? Yeah.
Yeah. A good portion of the school, especially from its founding, you know, probably a third of it came from homeschool. A third of it came from classical parochial schools, Catholic parochial schools, and the other third of it came from public schools. So it was a very nice mixture of exposure to wherever they had for education, but they do recognize there's a difference when they come to us. And for new families, I tell them, depending on how old your kiddos are, that it takes a little while to almost dewire their brain from what they had, especially public school setting, into a much slower pace of education, but a deeper pace of it, right? Of kind of what I talked about earlier. And it takes a good semester to really feel like you're understanding the level of questioning and the questions that I'm asking. It's a lot of questions because it's continual question asking, right? And so it just depends on, you know, where the parents have come from, but they've all come from a little bit different background. And some of them have told me, like, they've come as like, you know, if things don't go well here, there's no returning to where we came from. We would homeschool before we go back to where they came from.
Okay.
Which is a great testimony to the impact that the school has had on their own family and their own understanding of education too. Because the hard thing for all of us is that saying, like, well, I had it this way and I turned out okay, right? But what if I had it that way? What would I have turned out to be like, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I turned out wrong, right?
Right. It's more of like an opportunity-based mindset.
It is. Yeah. What more could I be giving of myself, or what more could I be doing? Or it is more of that separate mindset of opportunity.
So my last question for you, and I think this has been a really eye-opening discussion in terms of not only JP2, but just the classical approach and a return to traditional living. For parents who are listening who think, gosh, this is maybe so different from how we're living our lives now, but I'm really intrigued by it. What would your advice be to those parents? What initial steps could they take other than just Googling, right? But like maybe opening their minds and their hearts to a different approach.
Right. There's a lot of good foundational education books.
Okay.
Right. And one of them I did with my staff, and it was Rethinking the Foundations of Education. There are a lot of good books that are written that are questioning modern education versus this very classical, traditional educational approach that I would say has formed myself and my staff to have a better understanding. And I'm still growing in it. Still growing in it.
Yeah.
Right. That instead of just Googling it to find, and they're not very long. That's what's nice about them. You know, for someone who's new to it, that they might find it speaks to them in some way. You know, Beauty for Truth's Sake is another one that shapes more than just the education in a brick and mortar school, but the education of the family.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of very good modern books, relatively newer books that are written that are describing exactly what we're seeing in education as a whole, and as an option to do the opposite, right? And even I'm a big follower of a gentleman named John Sr., who had an integrated humanities program at KU back in the 70s with 2 other individuals. And they started their journey of, again, exposing your kids to something real. So my first suggestion would be to turn the TV off and read a story, right? Read a book, and then go outside when you're maybe camping as a family and just look at the stars. Or, you have a little cheat sheet in front of you about what each constellation is in the story, because your kids are going to remember the stories better than you and I.
Yeah.
Kids have that ability to memorize.
I know.
Or hear
They have
things
like
once.
elephant memories.
They do. And so just those little bits of beauty in the home life, right, will begin to shape the way in which you view your parenting, in which you view the education that your children may be receiving. And those are just couple simple things that you can do in your home, right, of that might get you to think, okay, now I'm ready for that bigger book, right? Or maybe I'm ready to reach out to different classical schools or those problem-based schools of hands-on learning, right? Now, I'm a big proponent of classical Christian education, and there are plenty. There are a lot of classical Christian schools, and they're all similar in the way in which they use their curriculum, right? So if you're in an area that maybe doesn't have that, there are also online schools, and this is coming from someone who doesn't use technology much, right? But there are homeschool communities and homeschool blogs that give their perspective of homeschool mom and what they do to bring in beauty into their home, right? And again, it always goes back to reading, but even a book called Theology of the Home. How do you set up your home and intentional about the things that you put in it? Those are all just very quick resources that come to the top of my head of what would I encourage. And again, maybe shutting the TV off for an evening and reading to your children and seeing how they respond. That's something very easily.
Yeah. Well, that's what I've learned a lot throughout our discussion, and it's been very inspiring for me personally as well. And I think it's not too late if you want to do some things differently, or you do want to turn the TV off or put away the phones, right?
We have a pair of board members on our board that they, as parents, they have kids probably maybe a little bit younger than I am, adult children that they did parent this particular way, and they all had phones, and they took a step back as parents, like, what are we doing? And they changed their parenting for the younger four and didn't have phones for them, downplayed the role of the TV, right? And those adult children are coming back. There's two different relationships there. And I can't speak to this wholeheartedly. They gave this testimony to our parent night, right? And so I can't speak to it justly like they speak to it because it's their personal encounter. But they discuss the impacts of the younger children and how thankful they were of their parents of making that last minute change, of how difficult it was for them to do that, but also the impact it's had on them. And again, I can't share that wholeheartedly because that's their story to share, but they share that with parents of, it's never too late to make a change in our parenting. Because as I said, none of us are perfect parents.
And that's not the goal either.
That is not the goal.
Yeah.
That's not the goal, right? And for us just to even consider that as parents, like, what are we doing? Are we being intentional about it? Of stopping and thinking about that? Maybe that's all we need to do, right? And the rest we leave in God's hands of, Lord, help us make the good decisions for the sake of the children which you've bestowed upon us. That these are your kids and you've given to us to oversee. Help me have the strength to do that.
Yeah.
The courage to do that. Help me do it correctly,
Give me some perseverance.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your insights. I think this conversation has been really informative, and hopefully will give parents a lot to think about. It's given me a lot to think about. And I'll hit you with a Latin phrase, tempus fugit. Okay. Time flies.
Time flies. Yes, it does.
Yeah. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening today. If it challenged your way of thinking or gave you that little bit of courage you were looking for, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, you don't have to be on this journey alone. If you want to connect with like-minded founders and parents, download the Vela app in the App Store or Google Play. Own your education and your life will follow.
This show is part of the ICT Podcast Network. For more information, visit ictpod.net.